My name is Hannah. I'm 38 years old, and for most of my adult life, I believed I was an ordinary woman, a mother, a wife, an artist. I work as a freelance children's book illustrator, spending most of my days surrounded by sketches of smiling faces, colorful animals, and soft watercolors. But nothing in those drawings prepared me for the emptiness that started inside my home one quiet, rainy afternoon. That day, I came home from therapy a little later than usual. The air smelled of wet asphalt, and thunder rolled low in the distance. I remember opening the door and hearing the faint sound of laughter in the kitchen, my children's laughter. Eli was 10, curious and always asking questions about everything. Sophie was 8, shy but with the brightest green eyes you could imagine. Their voices filled the house with warmth. I smiled, relieved to hear them after another draining session with Dr. Calloway, my therapist. But then I froze. Their laughter turned into whispers. I couldn't make out every word, but then I heard it clear as a knife through glass. "You won't remember us, Mom." The tone wasn't playful. It was solemn, resigned. My heart started pounding. I stood there, hand still on the doorframe, not daring to move. I wanted to step into the kitchen, to demand what they meant, but my voice wouldn't come out. The walls suddenly felt too close, the air too heavy. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were pretending, playing some kind of weird game. But the way Sophie's voice trembled, it wasn't pretend. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I sat in my studio long after midnight, sketching their faces over and over again, terrified that one day my memory might betray me. The accident had already taken enough from me. A year ago, I had lost fragments of my memory after a car crash. The doctors called it traumatic amnesia. Some days, I forgot where I left things. Other days, I'd forget entire conversations. But I never forgot them, never my children. At least, that's what I believed. I kept drawing. The lines became shaky. Sophie's smile wasn't quite right. Eli's hair, was it brown or lighter? I used to know that instantly, but now, I hesitated. When the sun finally started to rise, I closed the sketchbook, exhausted. I remember whispering to myself, "See? I remember them." But when I woke up the next morning, everything changed. The light was pouring softly through the blinds. My sketchbook was open on the desk where I'd left it. At first glance, nothing seemed wrong until I leaned closer. Sophie's face was fading. Her eyes, once so detailed, were now faint smudges. Eli's grin had turned into a blur of gray. The paper wasn't wet. It wasn't damaged. The other drawings, my landscapes, my client work, even random doodles, all looked perfect. Only their portraits were disappearing. I stared for a long time, disbelief twisting into dread. I tried to redraw the missing parts, but something strange happened. I couldn't remember exactly what they looked like. Their laughter, their expressions, the way they looked when I said goodnight. All of it felt distant, like trying to recall a dream you knew was fading the moment you woke up. I gripped the pencil so tightly it snapped in my hand. My heart pounded, panic rising like fire in my chest. I ran down the hallway to their bedrooms. Eli's bed was empty, his blanket neatly folded. Sophie's stuffed bunny was sitting perfectly in the middle of her pillow, untouched. Their closet doors were open, but their clothes were gone. It looked like no one had slept there in weeks. My throat tightened. "Eli? Sophie?" I called out, voice cracking. "This isn't funny." The only answer was silence. The kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room, it swallows it. I rushed to the kitchen. The cereal bowls were gone. The dishes were clean. The refrigerator hummed quietly. And that's when I noticed something on the door. A note. It was written in uneven handwriting, familiar, yet trembling. It said, "Don't look for us, Mom. You already let us go." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind refused to believe what my eyes were seeing. I touched the note. The paper was warm, like someone had just written it. My knees gave out, and I slid down against the cabinet, clutching the paper like it was proof that I wasn't losing my mind. Tears blurred my vision, but the words stayed clear, haunting. "You already let us go." I read it over and over until the letters started to blur into each other. The clock on the wall ticked softly. Outside, rain began to fall again, steady and cold. I thought maybe this was a nightmare, one of those cruel tricks my damaged memory played on me. Maybe I'd wake up and everything would go back to normal. Maybe I'd walk into their rooms and find them still sleeping, safe and warm. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Something had started that night when they said those words. "You won't remember us, Mom." They weren't warning me. They were preparing me. And when I looked at their fading faces in the sketchbook again, I realized they were already slipping away. It started with the eyes. They disappeared first. When I opened my sketchbook again, Sophie's bright green eyes were gone, erased as if they had never been drawn at all. What remained were faint gray smudges, the kind that appear when you rub pencil dust too hard. Eli's wide grin had faded into an empty outline. I sat there frozen, staring at the pages I'd spent hours on, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I touched the paper lightly, afraid it might disintegrate. The lines weren't rubbed out, and there were no fingerprints. Just clean, untouched paper where their faces used to be. I turned the pages one after another, desperate for a clue. Every sketch of them, every drawing I had ever made was slowly fading. I flipped through years of work, from when Eli was a toddler to Sophie's first dance recital, all gone pale and empty. At first, I thought maybe it was the light, or humidity from the rain, but no other drawings were affected. My commissions, my landscapes, even the quick doodles I had done on napkins, all perfectly intact. Only my children's faces were vanishing. My hands started shaking. I ran my thumb over one of the faded portraits, pressing hard enough to tear the paper. Nothing changed. I couldn't stop whispering their names, Eli, Sophie, like saying them out loud would bring them back, but it didn't. I looked up at the framed photo on my desk, the one of us at the beach last summer. My heart froze. Their faces were missing there too. Not blurred, not faded, just gone. Blank spaces where my children once stood, my arms now wrapped around nothing. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. The picture frame fell and shattered on the floor, scattering glass around my feet. I told myself I was hallucinating. Maybe the trauma from the accident was resurfacing. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew something real, something wrong was happening. I grabbed my phone and called for them again, shouting their names down the hallway. No response. The house was silent, still, like no one had lived there in a long time. I rushed into their rooms again. The beds were still made. Their drawers were empty. The air smelled faintly of lavender and dust. I tore open the closet doors, nothing. That's when panic turned into terror. I ran to my husband's office, thinking maybe Ryan had taken them somewhere. Maybe there was an explanation. Something logical, but the room was spotless. His computer was gone. His files gone. Only an old coffee mug remained on the desk, ringed with dust. I sat there trembling, trying to piece together the night before. Had Ryan said anything strange? Did the kids seem distant? I couldn't remember. I couldn't remember anything. And then my eyes caught something strange on the refrigerator door again, a new piece of paper I was certain hadn't been there before. It was another note. Same handwriting. Same uneven slant. "Don't try to redraw us." I dropped it instantly. The sound of the paper hitting the floor seemed deafening in the silence. I pressed my hands to my head, trying to stop the dizzying swirl of fear. My breath came in ragged gasps. No, this couldn't be real. It had to be stress. Sleep deprivation. Something explainable. I picked up the note again, studying every letter. The ink looked fresh. I turned it over blank. I thought of my therapist, Dr. Calloway. Maybe she'd know what to do. She always told me to document what you see when my memory acted up. So I grabbed my phone and started taking pictures of the sketchbook, the photos, and the notes. But when I checked my phone's screen, the photos I had just taken were empty. The images showed only blank paper and empty frames. My children's faces didn't appear at all. It felt like a hole opened inside me. I stumbled back into my studio, shaking, clutching my phone to my chest. The room spun, shadows stretching across the walls like smoke. Something caught my eye on my drafting table, my sketchbook, open to a new page. I hadn't turned it myself. A faint, childish handwriting appeared across the blank page, one slow word at a time, as if invisible hands were tracing them. "Erase us, Mom, it's better this way." I screamed and dropped the book, stumbling backward into the wall. The words shimmered faintly, then began to fade just like the drawings before them. I stood there, paralyzed, watching as my children's message disappeared into nothingness. My mind felt like it was fracturing, reality splitting down the center. My instincts screamed to run, to get out of that room, but something in me couldn't move. I just stood there, staring at the blank. Page. My heart pounded so loud it drowned out the rain outside. Who wrote that message? How? Were they alive somewhere trying to reach me? Or had I created something I was never supposed to? The air grew colder, heavier. I could almost feel someone standing behind me, small hands brushing against my arm. Eli? I whispered. No answer, just the echo of my own trembling voice. I reached down, picked up the sketchbook, and pressed it to my chest. I won't erase you, I said softly. I won't. But even as I said it, the pages inside grew lighter, paler, and when I flipped to the last page, their names Eli and Sophie were gone. If they were gone, I needed to prove they had ever existed. After that morning, I refused to accept what I was seeing. I needed proof, something, anything that my children were real, that I wasn't unraveling inside my own head. The first thing I did was search the house. Every drawer, every cabinet, every shelf. I tore through photo albums, birthday cards, the box of keepsakes I kept in the attic. Each photo I found only deepened the nightmare. Where there should have been smiles and birthday candles and messy chocolate faces, there were blank spaces. Perfectly clean, like someone had cut them out, but the paper was smooth, untouched. No scissors, no tearing, just absence. In one photo, I was standing at a park, my arms stretched out as if resting around someone's shoulder, but there was no one there. Just me, smiling at an invisible shape beside me. I flipped through dozens more beach trips, school plays, Christmas mornings, and each one was the same. Eli and Sophie had vanished, not just from my drawings, but from every trace of my life. I ran to my computer, hoping maybe the digital photos were still there. I opened the folder marked Family. It was empty. Every single image file had been renamed to null. I slammed my fist against the desk, frustration boiling over into terror. No, you're real. You were here, I shouted into the silence. I didn't realize my hands were shaking until I saw the cursor blinking at me like a heartbeat. My mind spun in circles. Maybe Ryan had done this. Maybe he'd taken them somewhere. Maybe this was some sick manipulation to make me doubt myself. I needed answers. So I called my neighbor, Julie, the one who lived next door and often watched the kids when I worked late. She answered on the second ring. Hannah? Everything okay? Julie, I said, trying to steady my voice. You remember Eli and Sophie, right? My kids? There was a pause. Your kids? Yeah, I said quickly. You babysat them a few times. You brought Sophie that pink headband for her birthday, remember? Another pause. Longer this time. Hannah, she said carefully, I think you might be confusing me with someone else. You don't have kids. I froze. What did you just say? She sounded concerned now. You live alone, sweetheart. You've lived alone since I met you. Are you okay? I felt the blood drain from my face. Julie, don't do this, I whispered. Please, you know them. You've seen them. She sighed. I think maybe you should call Dr. Calloway again. Then the line went dead. The silence in my kitchen was suffocating. I could still see Julie's face in my mind, the way she used to smile when Sophie ran into her yard to play with her dog. How could she not remember? I stared at the refrigerator. The notes were gone. Both of them. I pressed my forehead against the cold surface, whispering, "What's happening to me?" That's when I remembered something. Ryan's camera. He used to record everything. Family trips, birthdays, random moments of the kids laughing. I'd never deleted those. I ran to the closet and pulled out the dusty old camcorder. My hands fumbled as I slid in the memory card. The files loaded one by one. The first video was labeled Eli's soccer game. My heart leapt. I clicked it open. The footage played, but there was no sound. The field was empty. The stands were empty. The whole video was nothing but a static gray sky and faint wind. The next file, Sophie's recital, same thing. Empty stage, empty chairs. Every single video had been wiped clean. But one file remained at the bottom titled, Home, MOV. It was time-stamped the night before the first note appeared. I clicked it open. At first, it was dark. Just the sound of breathing. Then, faintly, the camera turned toward my art studio. The frame wobbled, and I saw myself sitting at my desk, sketching something. Behind me, two small silhouettes stood quietly, just barely visible in the corner of the frame. Eli and Sophie. They weren't moving, just watching. And then Eli's voice, faint but clear. She won't remember us. The screen flickered and went black. I dropped the camcorder. My stomach turned. The sound of it hitting the floor echoed like a gunshot. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My whole body felt paralyzed. What was that video? Who filmed it? I didn't remember setting up the camera that night. My hands trembled as I picked it up again. The file was gone, deleted before I could replay it. I backed away slowly, heart racing, tears burning behind my eyes. My world was unraveling. Every trace of my children, every photo, every memory, every sketch was being erased, as if reality itself was rewriting around me. And yet, I could still feel them. Their laughter, their warmth, their little hands tugging at my sleeves. They had existed. I knew they had. I opened my sketchbook again, desperate for any remnant. The pages were blank except one. On the final sheet, scrawled in a child's familiar handwriting, were the words, "You weren't supposed to remember, Mom." I felt the room tilt. I dropped the book, pressing my palms against the floor to steady myself. Not supposed to remember? Why? What did Enlisa's was in visions? That mean? Tears streamed down my face as I whispered, "Who did this to us?" The rain outside grew louder, pounding against the windows like desperate fists. I felt a presence, then a chill creeping up my spine, like someone standing just behind me, and when I looked up at the reflection in the window, for just a split second, I saw them, Eli and Sophie, smiling, watching, and then, just like before, they faded into the glass. Ryan knew something. I could feel it. By the third day, the house no longer felt like mine. The silence had weight to it now, pressing down on my chest with every breath. The laughter that once filled these walls had turned into echoes in my mind, faint and fading. But there was one person who might still hold the truth, Ryan, my husband. He hadn't called, he hadn't texted. His phone went straight to voicemail every time I tried. The message that played was an old one, recorded months ago. His voice was calm, warm, familiar. Hearing it made my stomach twist. I tried to convince myself that maybe he was away on business, maybe his phone had died. But deep down, I knew. Ryan wasn't answering because he didn't want to, and that thought terrified me. I grabbed my car keys and drove to his office. The rain had started again, a thin mist blurring the windshield. The world outside felt colorless, unreal, like everything was fading along with my children's faces. When I reached the building, I barely remembered the drive. I walked straight past the receptionist, ignoring the way she frowned at me. "I'm here to see Ryan Decker," I said, voice sharp, shaking. She glanced at her computer, confusion creasing her brow. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but there's no one by that name working here." I blinked. "He's worked here for 10 years, I said. "He's an architect. He designed the Brookfield project. You must know him." She gave me that cautious, pitying look people reserve for the unstable. "We haven't had a Ryan Decker here since last December. He resigned. Moved away, I think." "Moved?" I repeated. The word felt foreign. "Moved where?" She shook her head. "No forwarding address. He said he was relocating with his family." My throat went dry. "His family?" "Yes," she said softly, her voice almost apologetic. I couldn't respond. I turned and walked out before she could say another word. The rain had turned heavier now, soaking my hair, my clothes, but I barely noticed. Ryan had told them he was moving away with his family. But if my children were gone, erased, who had he gone with? I drove home with my mind in chaos. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, my reflection in the rearview mirror barely recognizable. As soon as I got home, I went to his old laptop, one I hadn't touched since the accident. I opened it, praying for some clue, something that would explain everything. Most of his files were gone, deleted. But one folder remained, hidden deep inside the drive. It was labeled, Project Memory. The name alone made my stomach drop. I opened it. Inside were hundreds of image files, drawings, sketches, diagrams. They looked like my own art style but colder, more mechanical. I scrolled through them one by one, my breath quickening. Each image was a version of Eli and Sophie. Not photos, drawings, my drawings. Some unfinished, others with strange symbols drawn over their faces. One file was titled Phase 3, Dissolution. Another, Final Stage, Erasure. And beneath them all, a single document called End. My fingers shook as I opened it. It was a scanned image of a sketch. My own signature in the corner signed in red ink. Across the bottom, in Ryan's handwriting, were the words, "Erase to heal." I froze. My mind couldn't process what I was seeing. I tried to remember if I had ever drawn these exact images, but the memories blurred like wet paint. Had Ryan been working with my drawings? Editing them? Or he been the one directing me? There were dates on each file, carefully logged sessions, progress notes, memory reintroductions, symbolic disconnects. Each timestamp aligned with my therapy sessions with Dr. Calloway. My blood ran cold. It wasn't a coincidence. They were both part of something involving me and my children. I scrolled further down the document until I reached the last page. It was a transcript of a message Ryan had recorded. "If you're seeing this, it means the process has failed. You weren't supposed to reopen the sketches. You weren't supposed to remember them. The drawings are anchors. Hannah anchors to a memory that doesn't belong to this world anymore. Anchors. Process." None of it made sense. I slammed the laptop shut, heart pounding. This couldn't be real. Ryan wouldn't do this to me. He loved our kids. He loved me. But then I remembered the way he'd looked at me after the accident, haunted, guilty. He'd stopped talking about the crash, avoided any mention of that night. Whenever I brought it up, he'd change the subject or leave the room. Maybe he'd been hiding something all along. Maybe he'd known what really happened to Eli and Sophie. The rain outside intensified, hammering against the windows. Lightning flashed, illuminating the room for a brief second, and in that instant, I saw something. On the wall across from my desk was one of my largest framed sketches, our family portrait. I'd drawn it months before the accident. Now, there was something new on it. Across the glass, scrawled in what looked like red pencil, were the words, "Don't reopen the sketches." My breath caught in my throat. I stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. The message hadn't been there before. I would have noticed. My gaze darted to the laptop. The folder I'd opened was gone, vanished from the screen. I yanked the power cord out of the wall, trembling. "Ryan, what did you do to us?" I whispered into the dark. There was no answer. Only the low hum of the rain and the flickering of the lights. And then, as if in response, the monitor flashed one last message, white text against black. "You erased them to survive." The screen went black. I sank to the floor, my hands covering my face, sobs shaking through me. And in that moment, I understood the truth. I'd been running from Ryan, hadn't taken them away. I had. Dr. Calloway wasn't who she said she was. After the message on the laptop, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The words, "You erased them to survive," looped through my mind like a song I couldn't turn off. My house felt like a stranger's home now, every wall whispering things I didn't want to remember. By morning, I decided I couldn't stay there another second. I needed answers, and there was only one person who might still give them to me, Dr. Calloway. I drove through the fog-heavy streets, the kind that made everything look blurred, unfinished, like one of my fading sketches. My hands gripped the steering wheel tight. The windshield wipers dragged across the glass, matching the slow rhythm of my heartbeat. Her office was tucked behind a quiet stretch of medical buildings, the kind of place that always smelled like coffee and antiseptic. I stormed in without knocking. She was sitting behind her desk, glasses perched on her nose, calmly flipping through paperwork. When she saw me, her smile faltered. "Hannah," she said softly, "you weren't scheduled for today." "I'm not here for a session," I snapped. "I'm here for the truth." Her brows drew together. "What truth?" "Don't play games with me," I shouted, slamming my hands on her desk. "What is Project Memory? What does erase to heal mean? What did you and Ryan do to me?" Her face drained of color. She froze for a moment, then slowly removed her glasses and set them down. "You weren't supposed to find that." "Find what?" I demanded. She sighed, her voice trembling slightly for the first time since I'd known her. "Sit down, Hannah." "No," I said. "Tell me." Her hands folded tightly in front of her. "You remember the car accident?" she said quietly. "Of course I do," I snapped. "You've been making me relive it for months." Her eyes flickered toward the window. "Not all of it." "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then said, "That night, you weren't driving home from the art gallery like you remember. You were coming from the hospital." My stomach twisted. "The hospital?" "Yes. You'd had complications with your pregnancy." I shook my head, confused. "No, that's wrong. I wasn't pregnant then. I had Eli and Sophie already." She looked at me with such deep sadness that my breath caught. "Hannah," she whispered, "you never brought them home." The room tilted. "You're lying," I said, voice cracking. "I have pictures. I have drawings, videos, fabrications," she interrupted gently. The mind's way of coping with trauma. I stepped back, shaking my head violently. "No. No, you don't get to rewrite my life like that." She rose from her chair, coming around the desk. "Hannah, please. You had a miscarriage, twins. You lost them before they were born. You created them after the accident, during your recovery. Ryan and I designed Project Memory to help you process the grief." Her words cut through me like ice. "Created them?" She nodded, tears now forming in her eyes. "You painted them, drew them, named them. You gave them faces, personalities, lives. You built your children through art." "No," I whispered. "They were real. I felt them. I held them." "Your mind made it real," she said gently. "That's what trauma does, it fills the empty spaces with something it can bear." I stumbled backward until I hit the bookshelf. My vision blurred. The room was spinning again, my heartbeat roaring in my ears. "If what you're saying is true," I said, my voice breaking, "then why do I keep hearing them? Why do I see them?" "Because," she said softly, "you're not ready to let them go." I pressed my hands to my ears. "No, you're lying. Ryan was in on this. He's the reason they're gone." Her expression darkened. "Ryan wanted to stop the project. He thought you deserved to remember. But remembering was destroying you." "What do you mean destroying me?" She hesitated, then walked to her filing cabinet. She pulled out a folder thick, labeled with my name. She placed it on the desk and opened it slowly. Inside were sketches, notes, psychological assessments, all written in her handwriting and Ryan's. One page stood out. "Subject exhibits lucid visual hallucinations, imagined children, consistent with unresolved trauma." My knees gave way, and I sank into the chair across from her. "So, they were never real?" I whispered. She took a long breath. "They were real to you. And that's all that mattered." I stared at the folder. The words blurred through my tears. It couldn't be true. I could still feel Eli's small hand gripping mine, Sophie's soft curls brushing against my shoulder. Those weren't hallucinations. They were my children. I looked up at her, my voice trembling. "Then why are they fading now? Why are their drawings disappearing?" She looked at me with that same mournful calm. "Because your mind is healing. The drawings were anchors to your grief. You kept them alive through creation. But the more you face the truth, the less your mind needs them to exist." I shook my head, unable to accept it. "They're sending me messages, doctor. Notes. Erase us, Mom. Don't redraw us." "You're telling me I made that up too?" Her lips trembled. "Sometimes our subconscious speaks louder than we realize." Tears spilled down my face. I didn't know whether I wanted to scream or collapse. She walked to the desk, took a small sealed envelope from the drawer, and handed it to me. "This is from your final session," she said softly. "You wrote this for yourself, in case you ever reopen the sketches." I stared at it. My own name was written on the front in my handwriting. "What's inside?" I asked. Her eyes glistened. "Answers. But you're not ready to read it yet." I clutched it to my chest. "When will I be ready?" "When you see the final drawing," she said quietly. "You'll know." I turned to leave, tears blurring the hallway as I stumbled toward the exit. As I opened the door, her voice followed me soft, trembling, almost like a prayer. "They're not gone yet, Hannah." I froze in the doorway, but when I turned back to look at her, her chair was empty. Memory came back like shards of broken glass. That night, I drove with the envelope clutched tightly in my hand, my fingers digging into the paper as if I could squeeze answers out of it. I didn't open it. I couldn't. Every part of me screamed that I wasn't ready, but something inside me knew where I had to go. Back to where everything started, the bridge, the place where my life had split into before and after. The rain was relentless, soaking through my coat, turning the road into a mirror of headlights and grief. My wipers squealed against the glass, but they couldn't keep up. The world blurred, just like my memories. As I approached the old iron bridge, a chill crawled up my spine. I hadn't been there since the night of the crash. The police had told me I was lucky to be alive. They said my car had gone through the guardrail, spinning into the river below. But they also said something that never made sense, that I had been alone in the vehicle. Standing there now, the memory began to claw its way back. I parked the car and stepped out into the downpour. The sound of the river beneath was deafening, its current black and wild. The metal rail still bore a twisted scar where my car had torn through it. I walked closer, heart pounding, the cold cutting into my skin. And then, for the first time in a year, I remembered the screams. Not mine, theirs. Sophie's high-pitched cry, Eli shouting my name. The sound hit me so suddenly I stumbled forward, clutching my head. I saw flashes, blinding headlights, a curve too sharp. Ryan's voice shouting something I couldn't make out. The smell of burning rubber. A screech. Then impact. Glass shattered. Metal screamed. And then, silence. I gasped for air as if I were drowning all over again. The world around me swayed. My vision dimmed around the edges. I gripped the railing, breathing hard, trying to separate memory from madness. I remembered Ryan pulling the wheel, his voice yelling my name one last time, then nothing. But one image stood out sharper than the rest. 2 small car seats in the back. Empty. I fell to my knees. Water splashing around me. My sobs mixing with the sound of rain. If what Dr. Calloway said was true, if Eli and Sophie were never real, then what had I heard that night? Who had screamed my name? I looked up toward the road. Through the sheets of rain, the headlights of passing cars blurred into ghostly streaks. For a moment, I thought I saw 2 small figures standing on the far side of the bridge, hand in hand. My breath caught. "Sophie?" I whispered, stepping closer. "Eli?" The figures didn't move. Lightning flashed, and for a heartbeat, their faces became clear. It was them. My children. Just as I remembered. Sophie in her blue dress. Eli with his messy hair and crooked grin. But their eyes looked different. Sad. Knowing. My voice broke. "Please come home, please." They shook their heads slowly, still holding hands. "You weren't supposed to come back here," Sophie's voice echoed faintly over the wind. Eli added softly, "It hurts too much when you remember." Tears streamed down my face, mixing with the rain. "I can't let you go again," I whispered. Sophie smiled, a faint, sorrowful smile that twisted my heart. "You already did, Mom." And then lightning struck again, bright and blinding, and they were gone. The space where they had stood was empty, just mist and rain. I sank to the ground, shaking, the truth bleeding through my memories like ink through paper. They weren't ghosts, they weren't figments. They were grief, pieces of me I wasn't ready to lose. I forced myself to stand, every muscle trembling. I had to know, had to face the part of the memory I'd buried deepest. I followed the curve of the bridge to the spot where my car had gone through. The railing was bent outward, metal rusted and sharp. There were flowers there, fresh ones. Someone had been visiting. My heart skipped. Ryan. It had to be him. I knelt beside them, tracing my fingers over the soaked petals. Beneath the flowers was a small wooden plaque, half hidden by moss. The engraving was faint, but I could still make out the words, "In memory of Ryan Decker, beloved husband." I froze. Ryan was dead. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move, couldn't think. The letters blurred through my tears. All this time I'd been searching for him, blaming him he'd been gone. That's why he never answered. That's why his office said he'd left. He hadn't left, he'd died in the crash. The scream that tore out of me didn't sound human. It was every ounce of pain I'd buried, every nightmare, every denial. I collapsed against the cold metal, my sobs swallowed by the storm. Somewhere in the distance, thunder cracked, echoing like a heartbeat through the valley. And then, through the blur of tears and rain, I saw something else, 2 faint shapes standing behind the plaque. Smaller this time, softer. Eli and Sophie. They didn't speak. They just looked at me, their faces calm, almost glowing. Sophie tilted her head and whispered, something I barely caught, words that felt both gentle and final. "Don't remember us, Mom. It hurts too much." And then the wind carried them away. The rain stopped. The world went silent. I stood there, soaked and broken, the envelope still clutched in my hand. And for the first time, I understood why I had erased them. Because remembering meant reliving the day I lost them all. I opened it with shaking hands. By the time I got back home, dawn was breaking, the world painted in pale gray. The rain had stopped, leaving everything cold and slick, like the earth itself was trying to cleanse what had happened on that bridge. My clothes clung to me, heavy with water and grief. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, staring at the envelope resting on the passenger seat. The edges were damp from my hands. My name was written across the front in my own handwriting firm, deliberate. Like I'd wanted to make sure I wouldn't ignore it when the time came. Doctor, Calloway's voice echoed in my head. Open this only when you see the final drawing. But I didn't have any drawings left. I'd erased them all, or maybe they'd erased themselves. Either way, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I took a deep breath, tore the seal, and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The handwriting was unmistakably mine, but the words didn't sound like something I would write now. They were calm, composed, almost like someone who'd already made peace with what I was still fighting to accept. If you're reading this, you've remembered too much. You weren't supposed to see the sketches again. You weren't supposed to reopen the past. But I understand. You needed to know. My eyes blurred with tears. I blinked them away and kept reading. The truth is simple, even if it feels impossible. You created them, Hannah. You gave them names, faces, and laughter because your heart needed them to live somewhere. Eli and Sophie were never ghosts, they were grief made visible. You built them so you wouldn't drown in silence. I pressed a trembling hand over my mouth, trying to hold in the sob that wanted to tear through me. You lost them before they were born. Ryan couldn't save you from that pain. Neither could I. So we built Project Memory. It wasn't an experiment. It was mercy. The words tilted on the page as tears fell and smeared the ink. The sketches were designed to hold your pain until you were ready to let go. Every time you drew them, you gave them shape. Every time you remembered them, you gave them life. But when you began to heal, when you started to forgive yourself, they began to fade. My chest ached so hard it felt like my heart might burst. I clutched the paper tight, reading the final lines through tears. Don't think of it as losing them again. Think of it as giving them rest. You don't need to draw them anymore. You don't need to remember them to love them. Erase them with love, Hannah. That's how you set them free. The last sentence was underlined twice. Erase them with love. I sat there, motionless. The rain outside had stopped completely, and the world felt unnaturally still, as if it was waiting for me to make a choice. My sketchbook sat on the passenger floorboard, the same one that had terrified me just days ago. I picked it up carefully, afraid it might crumble in my hands. The cover was warped from water, but when I opened it, I saw the faint traces of my children's faces, ghostly outlines, barely visible. For a long time, I just stared at them. Their eyes, their smiles, the life I had given them through graphite and paper. Then, slowly, I reached for my eraser. My hands trembled as I pressed it against the page. I started with Eli's hair, soft, messy lines that had once been so full of joy. Each stroke of the eraser left behind a faint smudge, like a whisper of what had been. As I worked, I whispered to them. "I'm sorry," I said. "I just wanted to see you." Sophie's face blurred next. I could barely see her smile now, just a faint shimmer of what my heart remembered. The harder I tried to erase, the gentler my movements became, because I wasn't erasing them out of pain anymore. I was letting them rest. The room around me grew strangely warm. The air felt alive, humming softly. I paused, hand frozen above the paper. I could almost hear them. Sophie's giggle. Eli's voice. "Thank you, Mom," they whispered together, their voices distant but tender, filled with peace. Tears rolled down my cheeks as I whispered back, "I love you both, always." The eraser slipped from my fingers. The pages glowed faintly in the morning light. And then, right before my eyes, the last traces of their drawings shimmered and faded. The paper turned completely blank, but it wasn't empty. It was clean. The air in the room shifted. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't dared to feel: relief. The ache in my chest didn't vanish, but it changed. It softened, like an old scar that had finally stopped hurting. I closed the sketchbook carefully, pressing my palm against its cover. The faint warmth beneath it felt like a heartbeat. Maybe they weren't gone. Maybe they were just somewhere I couldn't reach anymore, somewhere they were finally at peace. I placed the envelope beside it, folded neatly. My eyes caught the faintest shimmer of ink on the last line, like it had been rewritten while I wasn't looking. 4 words glowed faintly under the light. "We love you too." I stared at the page, tears streaming down my face, whispering their names into the quiet. Eli, Sophie. The names that once tore me apart now felt like a lullaby. And as the morning sun broke through the clouds, I realized I hadn't erased them at all. I had set them free. I set up my sketchbook one last time. After I erased them, I thought that was the end of it, that I could finally rest. But the house still hummed with an emptiness I couldn't ignore. The walls felt too quiet, the air too still, as if the silence itself was holding its breath. It had been 3 days since I'd opened the envelope, 3 days since I'd said goodbye. But every night, I woke to faint whispers, soft laughter, the sound of small footsteps padding across the wooden floor. Part of me wanted to ignore it, the other part knew what it meant. They weren't gone yet, not completely. That night, I decided to face it not with fear this time, but with love. I went into my studio, lit a few candles, and cleared the cluttered desk where my sketchbook usually sat. The smell of paper and graphite filled the air, comforting in a way that hurt. The sketchbook lay open in front of me, blank, waiting. The pencil felt strange in my hand, heavier than usual. My heart pounded slowly, rhythmically, as if urging me forward. For the first time, I wasn't drawing to remember. I was drawing to say goodbye. I started with a soft outline, 2 small figures side by side holding hands. The pencil glided easily, guided by muscle memory. I didn't have to think about their faces. My heart remembered them better than my mind ever could. Sophie's round cheeks, Eli's mischievous grin. The small details came naturally, like they'd been waiting to emerge one last time. As I drew, the candlelight flickered across the paper, making the images look alive, their smiles glowing faintly. I whispered while I worked. "I know what you were trying to tell me," I said softly. "You didn't want me to suffer anymore. You wanted me to live." The sound of the pencil scratching against paper was the only response. When I finished Sophie's eyes, those beautiful green eyes, my vision blurred with tears. I brushed them away, careful not to smudge her face. "I miss you," I whispered. "Both of you." The studio felt warmer suddenly, like someone had turned up the heat. The candles flickered brighter, the air vibrating gently. I took a deep breath and continued. This time, I drew Ryan. His arm was around them, his expression calm and proud. I'd forgotten how much love I could fit into a single line until I saw his face take shape on the page. When I was done, I looked at them, my family all together again. Not as ghosts, not as pain, but as memory. The tears came freely now, quiet and unrestrained. I didn't try to stop them. I leaned closer and whispered, "It's okay now, you can rest." As if the room had been waiting for those words, the candle flames steadied. The air shimmered faintly, and I swear I heard it 2 small voices, clear and soft as a breeze. "Thank you, Mom." I froze, my heart stopping for a moment. Then, slowly, I smiled through the tears. "You're welcome," I whispered. "I love you." When I blinked, the lines on the paper began to blur. Not fading, just softening, melting into the white of the page. It was beautiful, peaceful, like watching fog roll in over a calm sea. Their faces didn't vanish in fear this time. They dissolved into light. And as the last traces of graphite disappeared, a faint glow remained on the paper, a gentle shimmer, pulsing like a heartbeat. I set my pencil down and let out a long, trembling breath. My hands were still shaking, but not from fear, from release. The sketchbook glowed faintly for a few seconds more before it dimmed completely. When the light vanished, the paper was clean, blank again. But the air in the studio wasn't empty. It was filled with something warm, love, forgiveness, peace. I looked up, and for a brief, impossible second, I saw them. Eli, Sophie, and Ryan standing by the window, illuminated by the moonlight. They were smiling. Eli waved. Sophie pressed her small hand against the glass. Ryan's eyes met mine, and in them, I saw everything I needed: pride, love, and understanding. My throat tightened. "Goodbye," I whispered. Ryan shook his head slowly. "Not goodbye," his lips seemed to say. "Just remember, with peace." And then they were gone. The candles flickered once, then steadied. I sat there for a long time, letting the silence wash over me. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was soft. Eventually, I stood and closed the sketchbook gently, as if tucking something precious away. The cover was warm to the touch, humming faintly, not like before, when it burned with fear, but with quiet life. I placed it on the highest shelf in my studio, beside a jar of my oldest brushes and a small photo of Ryan and me from our wedding day. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to draw anymore. I didn't need paper or pencil to keep them alive. They were here, inside me. The rain had started again outside, tapping softly against the windows. But it didn't sound mournful now. It sounded like music, gentle, rhythmic, cleansing. I blew out the candles one by one, watching the smoke curl into the air. When I turned to leave the studio, something stopped me. On the desk, right where the sketchbook had been, there was a new drawing. I hadn't made it. It showed a woman me standing between two children, all three holding hands beneath a soft halo of light. Beneath it, in neat handwriting that wasn't mine, were 4 words. "We'll always be here." I pressed a hand over my heart. For the first time in years, I smiled without breaking. And as I turned off the light, I realized I hadn't drawn them back, they had drawn me. The new drawing was a message. The morning after I drew them for the last time, I woke to sunlight spilling through my curtains. For once, it wasn't harsh. It felt warm, gentle, healing. I couldn't remember the last time I'd opened my eyes without feeling dread clawing at my chest. The studio door was slightly ajar. I could still smell the faint trace of burnt candle wax and pencil lead from the night before. My first thought was that I'd dreamed it all, the final drawing, the glow, even hearing their voices. But when I stepped inside, the air felt different, lighter. The sketchbook still sat on the desk, but beside it was something new. A sheet of paper. It hadn't been there before. I was certain of that. I'd cleaned everything up before going to bed. I hesitated, then walked closer. The drawing on the page was beautiful, soft lines, delicate shading, every stroke confident. But I hadn't drawn it. I knew that instantly. The style wasn't mine. It was too fluid, too graceful, as if the artist had drawn from memory and not from observation. The image showed a woman me standing between two children. They were holding hands, looking toward a sunrise breaking over the horizon. The light in the drawing was breathtaking, a soft glow that seemed to shimmer when the morning sun touched it. My breath caught in my throat. At the bottom corner of the page, a faint signature read, "Eli and Sophie." I covered my mouth with my hand. My whole body trembled as I stared at the paper. They had left me one last message. I sank into my chair, staring at the drawing through a blur of tears. The longer I looked, the more I saw tiny details only a mother would notice. Sophie's small bow, Eli's tilted head. They were happy, peaceful, the way I'd always wanted to remember them. The lines of the sunrise curved upward toward the woman's face, bathing her in light. For a moment, I thought I saw movement within the drawing, like the sun was truly rising, chasing away the gray. It was so subtle I could have dismissed it as a trick of my tired eyes. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't a dream or a hallucination. This was communication. I didn't know how or from where, but I knew my children had drawn this. Not from the world I could touch, but from the one I had finally set them free to live in. I framed the drawing and placed it on the wall above my desk. It felt wrong to hide it in a book or drawer. It needed to be seen, to exist in the light. When I stepped back, I realized something else. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to pick up my pencil. My hand didn't ache with the compulsion to draw. My mind wasn't racing with images I was desperate to capture. For the first time, I felt complete. I spent the next few days in quiet reflection. The world seemed different now, softer, almost reborn. I'd go for long walks and notice the smallest things. Sunlight filtering through leaves, the laughter of neighborhood kids, the smell of wet soil after rain. Everything I had once drawn to remember was now right there, alive before me. When I visited Dr. Calloway for my next appointment, she looked at me the moment I walked in and smiled. "You've changed," she said simply. I told her everything, the drawing, the warmth, the peace that had settled over me. She listened silently, eyes glistening. When I finished, she said, "Maybe they're not gone, Hannah. Maybe they've just found a new way to stay." Her words settled deep in my heart. We sat in silence for a while. Then she stood and walked to her bookshelf, pulling out one of my older sketchbooks she'd kept for therapy. She handed it to me. "Do you want it back?" I shook my head. "No," I said softly. "That version of me doesn't need it anymore." When I returned home, the light in my studio felt warmer than usual. I turned to look at the framed drawing, and my breath caught. The sun in the picture had risen higher. I stepped closer, my hand trembling as I traced the lines. I was sure it hadn't been that high before. Below the horizon, faint new words had appeared, so small they were barely visible. "We're proud of you, Mom." My knees gave out, and I sank to the floor, pressing my hand over my mouth to stifle the sob that escaped. I didn't feel fear, only overwhelming love. They were still watching over me, not haunting me, not pulling me back into sorrow, but guiding me forward. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of nightmares, but because my heart felt too full. I sat by the window for hours, staring at the stars, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. The moonlight fell softly across the room, landing directly on the drawing. And for a fleeting second, I saw movement again, two small shadows dancing in the light. Sophie, Eli. Their laughter echoed faintly, carried on the night air. And then, just before the light faded, I heard a whisper, gentle, certain, and filled with love. "We drew her for you, Mom." I smiled through the tears, and that's when I saw another figure appear in the drawing, faint, standing behind us. Ryan. Watching. Ryan had drawn the last picture. I just knew it. When I saw his faint outline appear in the drawing behind us, something inside me shifted. It wasn't fear this time, it was recognition. A sense of calm that spread through me like warmth after a long freeze. For the first time since the accident, his presence didn't feel distant or painful. It felt protective, intentional, almost like he was still watching over me. But that small glimpse reopened a door I hadn't dared to touch. If Ryan was there, if he'd somehow left me this message, what else had he tried to tell me before he died? I couldn't let that question rest. That night, I went to the attic and dug through old boxes, the ones labeled R+H. I hadn't opened them in years. Dust floated through the air as I peeled back the lids. Inside were fragments of our life together, postcards from our honeymoon, sketches we'd done side by side, love letters we'd written before our marriage. And then I found an old flash drive taped beneath one of his journals. It was labeled simply, "For Hannah." My heart stopped. I ran downstairs, plugged it into my laptop, and waited as the screen came alive. There was only one folder inside, titled Memory, the same name as the project that had haunted me for weeks. Inside were several video files. I opened the first. Ryan appeared on screen, sitting in what looked like Dr. Calloway's office. His hair was shorter, his eyes tired but kind. He smiled faintly when he looked at the camera. "If you're watching this, Hannah," he said, "then you've started remembering again." I froze, staring at the image of the man I loved. His voice was steady but soft, like he'd prepared for this moment, knowing how much it would hurt me. "You were never supposed to find out like this. I tried to protect you from the truth, but I see now that protecting you also meant keeping you trapped." He glanced down, his hand trembling slightly. "After the accident, you wouldn't wake up for 3 days. When you did, you didn't remember what happened. You kept asking where Eli and Sophie were. I didn't have the heart to tell you they never existed outside your mind." Tears blurred my vision. My hand went to my mouth as I whispered, "Ryan, Dr. Calloway and I created something to help you cope," he continued. "You're an artist, your gift is creation. So we thought maybe, if we let you draw them, you could give your pain a shape, a place to live that wasn't inside you." He smiled sadly. "You brought them to life so beautifully, Hannah. You gave them more love than some people ever feel in an entire lifetime. But it became too real. You started believing they existed. You started forgetting where the drawings ended and the world began." He took a deep breath. "That's when we designed the erasure protocol. Erase to heal. It wasn't about destroying them, it was about setting you free, about helping you stop reliving the pain." I could hear the regret in his voice. His eyes glistened as he said, "But I made one mistake. I didn't account for how strong love can be." He gave a soft, almost broken laugh. "Even when we erased the drawings, you kept finding ways to remember them. You'd start sketching again in your sleep, or you'd hear their voices. You said they were calling you back." He looked directly into the camera then, his expression filled with sorrow. "I knew I was losing you not to death but to grief, so I left you this. If I couldn't be there to help you remember with peace, I wanted to leave you a path to it." The video glitched, static flickering across the screen. "You might think you're erasing them again, but what you're really doing..." The screen cut out. I tried to reopen the file, but it was corrupted. The rest of the videos wouldn't play either. I slammed my hand against the desk in frustration, tears spilling freely now. The only thing that remained was a small text file labeled End Note. I clicked it open. There was only one line. "When you let go of pain, you'll see me again." My breath caught. I turned toward the drawing on the wall. The light from the sunrise within it had shifted again. Ryan's outline was more defined now, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. It wasn't possible. It shouldn't have been. But the warmth that filled the room told me it was. I pressed my fingers to the glass, tracing his shape. "I see you," I whispered. "I finally see you." A soft sound filled the room, a faint hum, almost like a low musical note. My laptop screen flickered again, and for just a second, the video returned. Ryan looked straight at me, eyes glistening. "I love you, Hannah. Always have. Always will." The screen went black. I covered my mouth, sobbing quietly, but for the first time, they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of release. Because in that moment, I understood. He hadn't left me to suffer. He'd left me the tools to heal, to find peace. I sat there for hours, the hum of the computer fading, the drawing still glowing faintly under the Ponce morning light. The warmth in my chest grew until it filled every corner of me. I whispered softly, "I forgive you." The candles I'd forgotten to blow out flickered once, and then, for just a moment, I swore I heard his voice again, gentle and close. "I love you too." And I smiled, because for the first time since that terrible night, it didn't hurt to hear his name. It felt like coming home. Art saved me, but it also nearly destroyed me. After I saw Ryan's final message, something inside me finally settled. It wasn't peace exactly, more like quiet acceptance. The kind that comes when you've cried every tear you have and there's nothing left but breath. The days that followed felt different. I still woke up early, still brewed my coffee the same way, still looked out the window and watched the fog roll across the street, but the heaviness that used to follow me like a shadow had lifted. For the first time in years, I didn't feel afraid to pick up a pencil. I walked into my studio, sunlight spilling through the blinds, and stared at the blank canvas before me. For so long, I'd used my art to hold on to grief, to keep the ones I'd lost tethered to me. But now, I wanted to use it to set myself free, so I began again. The first strokes were hesitant, trembling. My hand wasn't sure what to draw at first. My mind didn't fill with images of Eli or Sophie. There was no ache, no desperation, just the faint hum of possibility. Shapes emerged, light, shadow, and color swirling into something unfamiliar yet warm. I painted faceless figures surrounded by gold and violet hues. I didn't need to see their faces to know who they were. They were the people I had loved and let go. Days turned into weeks, and the paintings multiplied. My studio, once filled with sketches of children fading into emptiness, was now alive with color. Every canvas vibrated with life and movement. When I stepped back, I realized what I had created. A story told, through paint. The story of remembering without breaking. I called the collection The Ones I Remember. When I first displayed the series at a small local gallery, I expected silence, maybe polite applause from art lovers who didn't know what they were really looking at. But instead, people wept. They stood in front of the paintings and cried, some quietly, some openly, as if something in those faceless figures reflected their own losses. A woman approached me after the show, clutching my hand. "Your work," she whispered. "It feels like forgiveness." That's when I realized what my art had become. It wasn't just therapy anymore. It was connection, healing, not just for me but for others too. Every piece sold within days. The gallery owner begged for more, but I told him this collection wasn't meant for profit. Half the proceeds went to an organization that supported grieving parents. It felt right. I started receiving letters, handwritten ones from strangers. People who had lost children, spouses, siblings. They told me that my paintings helped them feel seen, less alone. That they no longer feared forgetting. I read each letter with trembling hands, my heart full. And I finally understood what Ryan and Dr. Calloway had wanted all along. Erase to Heal had never been about forgetting. It had been about transforming, turning pain into something that breathes light instead of darkness. One afternoon, I visited the cemetery where my unborn twins were buried. I hadn't been there since before the accident. The marble headstone was small, their names engraved simply, Eli Decker and Sophie Decker forever loved. I knelt down, brushing away the leaves that had gathered over time. I didn't cry. Not because I didn't miss them, but because I finally knew they weren't just buried here. They were in every brushstroke, every line, every beat of my heart. "I remember you," I whispered. "And I always will." A breeze swept through the trees, carrying the scent of rain. I closed my eyes and smiled. It almost felt like two tiny hands brushing against my cheeks, one on each side, soft, gentle, and gone before I could reach for them. When I got back home, I hung one of my new paintings above my bed. It was different from the others. This one was quiet, intimate, just light breaking through darkness. No figures, no names, just warmth. That night, I dreamed of them. Not as fading faces this time, but as laughter in the distance. In the dream, I was painting by the sea. The sky was clear, the sun low. Behind me, I heard Ryan's voice, calm and steady. "Keep creating, Hannah," he said. "It's how we stay." When I woke, I felt rested for the first time in years. I went into the studio again that morning. The light was golden, soft, filling every corner. My framed family drawing still hung above my desk, the one Ryan and the kids had left for me. It glowed faintly in the sunlight, the lines so delicate they almost looked alive. I stood there for a long time, staring at it. I didn't speak. I just smiled and whispered, "Thank you." Then, for no reason I could explain, I picked up a small sketchbook, the same one I'd used years ago when all this began. I flipped to a blank page and wrote 4 simple words in the corner. "I remember with peace." And then I closed it. I didn't need to draw anything more, because the story was already written in my heart, in my art, and in the love that never faded. Ryan had left one final chapter for me. It happened on a Thursday morning, one of those quiet, ordinary days that start with coffee and soft light. I was sorting through art supplies, cleaning my studio, humming without realizing it. The air felt lighter now, almost kind. That's when I found it. Tucked between 2 canvases I hadn't touched since before the accident was an old leather-bound sketchbook. I recognized it instantly. The scuffed corners, the worn strap, it was Ryan's. He'd carried it everywhere, always jotting down ideas for designs, sketches for buildings, even little doodles of us when we were younger. My breath caught as I brushed away the thin layer of dust. It shouldn't have been there. I'd searched the house 100 times before, but somehow, it had appeared, or maybe, I thought, I had only just been ready to see it. The front cover bore a faint engraving, "For Hannah." My fingers trembled as I untied the strap and opened it. Inside were drawings, but not of buildings or structures like he used to make. These were personal, intimate, pages filled with sketches of me, smiling. Some were from years ago, others recent, drawn after the accident, judging by the gray shading and trembling lines. And in between the portraits of me were drawings of Eli and Sophie. I sat down slowly, my legs too weak to hold me. Each page told a story. There was Eli sitting on Ryan's shoulders, laughing, Sophie holding my hand as we walked through a garden. Ryan had drawn them as if they were alive, not memories, not visions, but living, breathing children. He had believed in them too. Maybe not in the literal sense, but in what they meant. Love, healing, continuity. On one page, written beside a sketch of all 4 of us, was a short note in his handwriting. "I know they aren't real, but somehow, I still feel them near us." Maybe that's the point. Maybe love doesn't need proof. My tears fell freely now, splashing onto the paper, blurring the graphite. I flipped through the pages slowly, terrified and desperate to see what came next. Near the end of the book, the drawings grew darker, not sinister, but heavier, as if his hand had trembled while he worked. There were notes written in the margins, bits of fragmented thoughts. "She's fading faster than I expected. Doctor Calloway says she needs to forget to heal. If she remembers too soon, it could break her again." I pressed a hand over my chest, feeling the weight of every word. Ryan had carried my pain even after his death. He had been fighting to protect me, to make sure I didn't drown in grief. When I turned to the final page, my breath stopped. It was a family portrait. Ryan had drawn all of us himself, me, Eli, and Sophie standing together under a tree. The lines were delicate but confident, the details so vivid it almost looked like a photograph. At the bottom of the page, he had written one last message in small, careful letters. "Now you can remember us without pain." The words glowed faintly in the morning light, the graphite shimmering as if alive. I traced them gently, my fingers trembling. "Ryan," I whispered. It felt like he was there with me, not in spirit or ghostly form, but in the warmth that filled the room. The same warmth I'd felt when I erased the last of the drawings. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. the scent of his old sketchbook surrounding me, paper, pencil, and faint traces of his cologne. For a moment, it felt like I'd stepped backward in time, into one of our quiet mornings before everything fell apart. When I opened my eyes, the portrait on the page shimmered softly again. The light in the drawing seemed to expand, glowing from within. And then, impossibly, the graphite shifted. Colors bloomed across the page, soft yellows, deep blues, warm skin tones, until the black and white sketch transformed into something vibrant and alive. My heart pounded. I reached out, afraid to touch it. Ryan's eyes in the drawing seemed to meet mine. His lips curved into a faint smile. He had finished the drawing not in life, but somehow, in the space between memory and love. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I whispered, "You finished it for me." The pages rustled softly, though the air was still. I took it as an answer. For the first time, Ryan hadn't left me behind. He'd left me a bridge, a way to cross from grief to peace. This wasn't just a sketchbook. It was a love letter disguised as art, a map of healing. I turned the page again, just to make sure I hadn't missed anything. On the back of the final drawing, written in faint pencil, were a few last words, a message that made my breath hitch. "Memory isn't the opposite of loss, Hannah. It's proof that love never dies." The world seemed to go still. The air shimmered faintly again, as though the light itself was breathing. I closed the sketchbook carefully, holding it against my chest. My tears soaked into the leather, darkening it, but I didn't care. For the first time since that awful night, I didn't feel like something was missing. I felt whole. I whispered softly, "Thank you, Ryan, for everything." When I looked up, sunlight was streaming through the window, catching the framed family drawing on the wall. It glowed brighter than ever, filling the room with golden light. The warmth touched my skin, and for a fleeting second, I could almost hear them all: Ryan's laugh, Eli's joy, Sophie's gentle giggle, blending together into something soft and eternal. And when the light dimmed again, the drawing remained, untouched. For the first time, my family existed again forever, in art. Years passed, but their presence never left. Time didn't heal me all at once. It didn't rush in like sunlight breaking through clouds. It arrived quietly, gently, one morning at a time. Some days, I still woke up expecting to hear tiny footsteps running down the hall or Ryan's sleepy voice calling from the kitchen. Those echoes would never completely fade. But they no longer hurt. Instead, they became part of me. I built my life again, one painting, one heartbeat at a time. My art had found a new voice. Critics called my work hauntingly hopeful. And maybe they were right. Every canvas I created now carried two stories: the pain of what was lost, and the beauty of what remained. I no longer drew faces. I painted emotions, memory, longing, light. Every exhibition I held seemed to touch people in ways I couldn't explain. Strangers would come up to me after shows with tears in their eyes, saying they'd felt something in the colors, something that reminded them of the people they'd loved and lost. I would smile softly and say, "Then they're still with you." Because that's what I had learned. Grief doesn't disappear, it changes shape. It stops clawing and starts whispering. I moved to a small house by the sea a few years after the gallery success. I wanted peace, not noise. I wanted to hear the waves instead of city traffic. My home was quiet, filled with sunlight and salt air, with wide white walls for my art to breathe on. Every morning, I'd wake to the sound of gulls and the rhythm of the tide. I'd make coffee and stand by the large window overlooking the ocean. And on the wall above my work desk hung Ryan's last drawing, the one of all four of us beneath the tree. The paper had aged, but the lines never faded. Sometimes, in the right light, it still glowed faintly, just enough for me to know they were there. I didn't talk to them anymore, not out loud. I didn't need to. I felt them in everything, in the warmth of the sunlight, in the smell of rain before a storm, in the laughter of children playing outside. They had become part of the world. I began teaching art therapy classes at the local community center, sharing what I'd learned about using creation as healing. People came from all walks of life: widows, parents, soldiers, survivors. I told them my story, not as tragedy, but as proof that love could outlive loss. I always started the same way. Sometimes, what you draw isn't what you see, it's what your heart needs to remember. And somehow, that sentence seemed to open something in everyone who heard it. One day, after a class, a woman stayed behind. She was in her 60s, soft-spoken, with eyes that carried years of quiet pain. She handed me a folded paper. Inside was a drawing, just a rough sketch of a child holding a balloon. "I haven't drawn since my son passed," she whispered. "But tonight, I did. Because of you." Tears filled my eyes as I smiled. "Then you've already started healing." She nodded, her hand trembling slightly as she placed the sketch in my palm. "He feels closer now. Not gone. Just lighter." After she left, I placed her drawing on the wall beside my own. For some reason, it fit perfectly there. My little studio by the sea began to fill with artwork from others' paintings, sketches, letters. Each one carried a fragment of love reborn from grief. It became less of a studio and more of a sanctuary. And every night, as I sat surrounded by those pieces of life, I felt Ryan's quiet pride, Eli's laughter, Sophie's sweetness. Their energy lived in every brushstroke, every color. But it wasn't until the anniversary of the accident that I realized how far I'd come. That morning, I woke with a familiar ache in my chest, a dull heaviness that reminded me of what the day used to mean. I walked down to the beach barefoot, the sand cool beneath my feet, the waves rolling softly in rhythm. The sky was pale gold, the horizon, endless. I sat near the water's edge, sketchbook in hand. I didn't plan to draw anything, but my fingers moved on their own. Gentle lines began to form curves, light, soft shapes. When I finished, I looked down and saw what I'd made. A simple sketch of 4 figures walking along the shoreline, holding hands. Their reflections in the wet sand stretched toward the sea. I smiled, tears forming in my eyes. It wasn't sorrow anymore. It was gratitude. I tore the page gently from the book, folded it, and let the breeze carry it out over the waves. It drifted for a while, then landed softly on the water and began to float away. As it did, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden path across the ocean. And in that light, for just a heartbeat, I saw them, Eli and Sophie, running ahead, Ryan walking behind, watching over them. They turned toward me, smiling. Sophie raised her little hand, and I lifted mine in return. Then, like a reflection in the tide, they shimmered and were gone. The wind wrapped around me gently, carrying the faint scent of salt and something sweet, like rain after summer. When I went back inside, my heart felt light. I stood in front of Ryan's framed drawing. The sunlight through the window caught it perfectly, making the figures glow with soft gold. For a second, I could almost swear I saw movement, 2 small handprints appearing faintly against the glass, glowing like morning light. I smiled, whispering, "I remember you." The handprints faded slowly, leaving the glass untouched, clear as ever. And I understood. They weren't haunting me. They were reminding me. Love isn't something you escape from. It's something you learn to carry differently. I touched the frame gently and whispered, "Thank you for teaching me how." Then I turned toward the sea, sunlight pouring through the window, and felt something deep and steady inside me, peace. And for the first time, remembering didn't break me. It made me whole. I thought the story ended when I let them go, but love doesn't end. It was the anniversary of everything, the accident, the loss, and the rebirth of my life. 10 years had passed, though sometimes it felt like only yesterday. I had stopped marking the date with pain and started treating it as a quiet promise, a day to remember, not to mourn. That morning, the sea was calm. The sun rose slowly, painting the horizon in shades of pink and gold. I stood by the window of my studio, watching the waves break softly against the shore. The air smelled of salt and peace. I made myself a cup of coffee and walked to the framed drawing that hung above my desk, the one Ryan and the children had left behind. It looked different in the light today, almost glowing. I reached out and brushed my fingers against the glass. "Good morning," I whispered. The reflection of my own smile blinked back at me. But somehow, I felt theirs too, that warmth in the air, that gentle, invisible comfort I'd grown to recognize. I had one last thing to do. I gathered my old sketchbook, the one that had survived every storm, and the leather-bound one Ryan had left me. I tied them together with a ribbon and slipped them into my bag. Then I drove back to the bridge. It was still there, weathered and scarred, the metal rusted in places where the paint had peeled away. But it didn't scare me anymore. It felt like an old wound that had finally closed. I parked at the same spot where I'd stood years ago, trembling, lost. The air was cool, the wind steady. I walked slowly toward the railing, the sound of the river beneath steady and alive. I stood there for a long while, remembering everything not as trauma, but as story. My story. The laughter that once filled my home, the crash that changed everything, the drawings, the fading, the erasures, the healing. It all felt distant now, like pages of a book I'd once read. I opened the bag and pulled out the sketchbooks. The covers were worn, the pages soft with age. Inside them lived every part of me, the pain, the love, the healing, the art that rebuilt my soul. I held them close to my chest and whispered, "Thank you." Then I kissed the covers softly, as if they were the foreheads of my children. "I love you," I said. The wind lifted, brushing strands of hair across my face. The river below glittered under the sunlight, its surface rippling like glass. I placed the sketchbooks on the edge of the railing, my hands steady, my heart full. "Go," I whispered. "Be free." And then I let them fall. They tumbled gracefully, pages fluttering like wings before they touched the water and began to drift downstream. The sunlight caught them, turning them into flashes of gold as the current carried them away. I watched until they disappeared from sight. A stillness followed, a silence so complete that it felt sacred. I closed my eyes, letting the sound of the river fill me, the hum of nature wrapping around me like a lullaby. When I opened my eyes again, something shimmered in the air above the water. A faint light, soft and golden, rising slowly like mist. Within that light, I saw them. Ryan stood on the opposite side of the river, smiling at me. Eli and Sophie stood beside him, holding his hands. They looked radiant, not like ghosts, but like memories made flesh and light. I gasped softly, my heart aching but calm. They didn't speak this time. They didn't need to. Ryan lifted his hand, a gentle wave. Sophie mirrored him, her tiny fingers wiggling like she used to when she was shy. Eli grinned, that crooked grin that always made me laugh. Tears blurred my vision, but I smiled through them. "I see you," I whispered. And I swear for a moment I heard Ryan's voice in the wind, faint, tender, full of love. "We remember you too." The light shimmered brighter, surrounding them until they were nothing but gold and warmth. Then, slowly, it faded back into the river, leaving only sunlight and the sound of rushing water behind. I stood there long after they disappeared, hand pressed to my heart. I didn't feel broken. I didn't feel hollow. I felt complete. The wind carried the scent of rain, and I turned toward the sky, eyes closed, face lifted. "Thank you," I whispered again, this time to all of them, to Ryan, to Eli and Sophie, and to the version of myself that had survived long enough to reach this peace. When I finally walked back to the car, I felt lighter, as though I'd left not just grief behind, but the last fragments of guilt that had chained me to the past. The drive home was quiet. The sun followed me through the trees, the face follow, road curving softly ahead. When I reached the coast again, the horizon stretched wide and endless. At home, the house felt alive with light. The frame drawing above my desk glowed brighter than I'd ever seen it. For a brief moment, the lines seemed to move again, Eli running, Sophie laughing, Ryan's arm around me. Then the light softened, and everything settled into stillness. I walked to my desk and found a single slip of paper resting there. It hadn't been there before. My breath caught as I leaned closer. The handwriting was familiar, flowing, calm. Ryan's. It said, "Now draw yourself happy." My chest tightened, and for a long moment, I couldn't move. Then, with trembling hands, I reached for my pencil. I opened a fresh page in a new sketchbook, and for the first time in years, I didn't draw from memory. I drew from life, the woman I had become, her soft smile, her clear eyes, her peace. When I finished, I set down the pencil and looked at the drawing. The woman on the page looked back at me whole, strong, and free. And when I closed the book, I realized something profound. The pages didn't fade. The lines didn't blur. Because this time, I wasn't drawing loss. I was drawing life. I turned toward the window, where sunlight bathed the room in gold. And in that moment, I knew I would never stop remembering, but I would never hurt for remembering again. Because love, once drawn, never truly erases.